Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. But today we have a returning guest, someone who is a contemporary of the late Rene Girard in developing mimetic anthropology. Um, his name is someone that people are familiar with in the Girardian world, but he is becoming an advocate for many years into the broader public of understanding the importance of mimesis and understanding what Gil calls the apocalypse of the sovereign self. How you doing, Gil Bailie?
Just fine. Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Now, the subtitle of your book is called, which is out now, and I'm delighted to enjoy it. It's called Recovering the Christian Mystery of Personhood. Now, this is near and dear to my heart because when I encountered Girard's work, I started on radio calling it what Jesus was doing in history, the personhood revolution. You know, that was the way I was trying to explain it in my context. But this idea of personhood is at the core of this new work you have. So why did you want to write it? Is this something that was been pressing on your mind for some time, or are you revisiting a subject that you were doing earlier in your work?
Well, I suppose it was a little of both. Um, but it seemed particularly apropos today because there's a great deal of what you might call psychological dissociation taking place, where the experience of personhood is is disappearing behind this notion of the self. And I felt like as a non-specialist in these matters, I felt like it was important to write a book for non-specialist readers to talk about how the very concept of personhood came into currency thanks to Christianity, and the notion of the self is a shrunken version and mistaken version. Not that we couldn't use the word self now and again, but the idea of the self that we have is spiritually toxic and culturally toxic. So I felt like I wanted to write a book that would give, first of all, the first part of the book sort of analyzes the problem of the self, and then there's a transition chapter on the prodigal son, and then the second half of the book is about the mystery of person as understood in Christian terms. So So that's a broad,
Is
sweeping.
Is personhood as simple as a formula of individual plus, or let's say the self plus kenosis, self emptying equals person? Is that the difference, or would you say not so quick? It's not that easy.
Well, no, I'd say it's something a little different from that. The word person, we could talk about the self, but the word person comes into our vocabulary thanks to Christianity. I even on the back cover of the book, I quote Tertullian, who says the personhood. Well, what is that quotation? He says, "Oh, the soul is naturally Christian." He's really talking about the mystery of personhood there.
Yeah,
and he's the one who also the famous formulation of the Trinity is three persons in one God. Now, the concept of the person enters into our vocabulary at that moment. And the word person has a very strange, well, very intriguing, I shouldn't say strange, history. It comes out of the theatrical setting. A persona, perhaps before I get into this, I should, because I emphasize this often in the book, we are all persons from the moment of conception. So personhood is not something we acquire. It's something that we grow into and develop and are blessed by. But it's possible, we're all persons from the moment of conception, but it's possible to completely misunderstand and distort and abandon the riches of that idea, of that experience. To go back, the word person comes out of as many people know, comes out of a theatrical context. The first iteration of the word person came from the mask that an actor on the stage wears. And some people think that's a terrible superficiality, but there's something very profound about it, which is the actor on stage is liberated from his, I should say, self, from his selfness by virtue of his role in giving voice to another. So the mask, which was designed originally in those amphitheaters where it was more important to hear the voice than it was to see the costume, the mask was designed so as to amplify the voice of the character being portrayed. And I think this image stays with us. Paul says, "I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me." What was Paul trying to do? He was trying to allow his contemporaries to hear the voice of Christ, and it passed through him. Personare means something that passes through and is sounded out, but does not come. It's not a portrayal of the speaker. It's the representation of the person, of the character the speaker is trying to convey to his audience. So this is a mystery of personhood, which is, and I think Paul's "I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me" is the quintessential expression of personhood, that one lives thanks to the mystery of, say, in a Christian sense, one lives in gratitude for the mystery of Christ in one's life, and one tries to live and move and have our being in such a way that that mystery comes through us. So in that sense, everyone has an apostolic role to play in life. Every Christian, and that is to say, we are invited. It's a great privilege to proclaim Christ in our lives in whatever way is appropriate to each one of us. So the mystery of personhood is it's something that needs to be recovered. It's very much part of our heritage, but it's been overtaken since. And then you have to say where do we begin with the Renaissance or the Reformation or the liberalism or whatever it is, but it's been overtaken in all these manifestations by the idea of the autonomous self. And the autonomy of the autonomous self is what suffocates the spirit. And it's one of those situations where you never get enough of what you really don't want.
Yeah.
And so the self tries to instantiate itself, to establish itself, to manifest itself. And each consecutive effort to do that, it forsakes the experience of personhood in the deepest Christian sense. This, by the way, it sounds a little arcane, and but as you probably know, in the book, I use many examples, so that it's not a philosophical or a theological discourse. It's representation of what the self, the predicament that the self is in, and increasingly in, and the Christian alternative to it.
Yeah. So you point out, for example, the Flannery O'Connor character who is bedazzled by somebody who has lots of elaborate tattoos and continues to get more and more elaborate tattoos, and it never seems to provide the satisfaction that the model who was showing the ecstasy of having those tattoos seemed to have. What is the difference between the actor who comes in the name of another by the mask that has the person in it versus this Flannery O'Connor figure that you referenced in the book, who is getting tattoos? He's covering himself with tattoos. This actor is putting on a mask. What's the difference for the audience?
Well, in some ways, they're quite similar. I mean, the tattooed man in Flannery O'Connor's short story is the model for O.E. Parker. And O.E. Parker is, in many ways, proclaiming his Lord by covering himself with tattoos. He's manifesting his prime model for life, which has become, in a completely haphazard way, has become this character at the carnival who has tattoos all over his body. But I would maybe the way to do this is to compare two quotations, and I have them here in front of me for this purpose. If you comparing the self to the person, as many people know, in the 1992 Supreme Court decision, Anthony Kennedy famously said, quote, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Now, there's a word for that, nihilism.
Right.
Sooner or later, the shrugging nihilism of somebody like Pilate, who said, "What is truth?" becomes the Dionysian nihilism of a mob shouting, "Crucify him." These things are related, because if people live for a while or most of their existence with a false understanding of human subjectivity, they will default to something that relieves the boredom of not having a real religion. And the thing that most often relieves the boredom of not having a real religion is having a cause that allows you to unleash your anger and fury and frustration on somebody else. So all of this is related to Girard's analysis of the problem of mimetic contagion. So that was Justice Kennedy's quotation. Now compare Romano Guardini, who was a great German Catholic theologian, and he wrote the following. And this is also, of course, in the book. The knowledge of what it means to be a person is inextricably bound up with the faith of Christianity. An affirmation and cultivation of the personal can endure for a time, perhaps, after faith has been extinguished, but gradually they too will be lost. So person is a Christian concept, and it's been secularized and in such a way that it becomes a synonym for self. It's almost the opposite of a synonym for self. Or you could also say, for example, I think it's the first chapter of the book is entitled "The Triumph of the Will and the Twilight of Resolve." So again, you have words that, like self and person, which appear to be synonymous, but as with person and self, they're more antonyms, they're more opposite of one another. So the Twilight of the Will, of course, that echoes that terrible film celebrating Hitler's rise to power in Germany, which makes that chapter title a little more salient. But the triumph of the will is the idea of the will is self-will, is getting your own way, is to assert yourself, is to put yourself out there as the character who needs to be taken seriously, and so on and so forth. And the Twilight of Resolve, so will is wanting to get your own way, and resolve is the willingness to suffer for truth. To have resolve is to be willing to take up your cross in whatever situation you're in, or to, in a sense, man up to your deepest commitments, not a manifestation of yourself, but for we all want in our heart of hearts to be disciples. And we camouflage that desire by asserting ourselves as the ultimate authority, the ultimate that we don't bow to anybody. The idea of independence, autonomy, and so on and so forth. It's an anthropological mistake, and we've been nursing this anthropological mistake, as I said earlier, for centuries. But now it's gotten to the place where it's completely absurd. So people wake up one day and they decide that the man decides he's a woman, or a woman decides she's a man. And lo and behold, because we have invested everything in this idea of the self. So if I think I'm, a kangaroo, then I'm a kangaroo. I mean, it couldn't be more absurd. But that's the apocalypse of the sovereign self. The idea that I get to just choose whatever, but we don't. We're made a certain way. There is something called human nature, and it's not a derivative of animal nature. Our species is utterly unique, and we're like other creatures in so many ways, but we have one absolute distinction, and that is we all have religious longing. We have been implanted in us is a religious longing. Everywhere, if you look in the ancient world, every culture is religious. They may be religious in the most brutal and savage way, or they may be religious in a beautiful way. But all cultures are religious. So the question is, what do we do with religious longing? The other thing about religious longing, and this is something that one gets from studying René Girard's work, is that longing is mediated. It's inherent, it's intrinsic to us, but its expression is mediated. So we can't, if we're left to, if somebody's born in the forest and left in the forest to grow up, that religious longing will, who knows what, it might fall back into unawareness, or it might, whatever, but it's always mediated. And so religion is the attempt on the part of human attempt to give some expression to that religious longing, to satisfy it in some way. It can't be satisfied in this life, but to the extent that it's properly ordered to the living God, which is what all religions in their own way try to do, to orient to the God as they have come to see it. To the extent that religious longing is properly ordered, it will be properly ordered by virtue of some kind of mediation. So that mediation is called culture. It may be a very rudimentary culture, and it may be something that begins, on the mother's knee when the child is quite young, or even I have a chapter on the mother's smile, the exchange of a joy between a mother and her child. These are the incipient forms of a religious formation, to recognize that certainly in the Judeo-Christian sense, to recognize that I am known by God and desired by God and loved by God, who by a God who's willing to chastise me if I betray my inherent dignity as a child of God. So it's mediated by the culture. So when the culture loses its mind, huge numbers of people suffer spiritual depredations that are crushing. And to the extent that it's a culture that has been sort of secularized for a long time, like ours has, here in this country, in the United States, we're not as secularized as the Europeans, for example, are, and others, but we're still the secularization of our civilization is underway. And to the extent that that continues unabated, more and more people are going to be at a total loss when it comes to coming to grips with the religious longing at the heart of their existence. And it's to stand by to watch this is a heartbreaking thing. I mean, today you see things, you see young people, and not just young people, because they're being flattered into doing some of these things by their elder, but you see young people betraying their nobility for a bowl of a bowl of stew, like the Israelites, and it's a tragedy. So what I'm not a trained anthropologist or an academician or whatever.
That's probably a good thing.
Well, my readers, I think, are grateful for that, but I have thought about these things and read about these things for many years, and of course I had a great friendship with Rene, and he became my teacher in regards to these things. But I felt like it just seemed like, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, it took me 3 or 4 years to write the book. I just saw everywhere that the idea of the self was collapsing, and it was becoming a parody of itself, and that the spiritual consequences of that was enormous, and it was going to ripple down, through time. That the more secularized and de-Christianized our civilization becomes, the more unhappy people will be, and eventually people take their unhappiness and they wrap it into a nice little package, and they go out and start slaughtering people. Now, for example, a political party that represents roughly half of our population believes we can, with moral impunity, kill the child in the womb up to the 9th month. Now, if somebody woke up in 1950 and saw that, they woke up like Rip Van Winkle, and they saw that, they would have thought they were on another planet. But it's now become, and why? Because it's our choice. It's the woman's choice. We get to choose. We get to choose. It's we're not, and then of course it will become euthanasia if people get old and they get decrepit, and when the thought processes just develop, and it becomes nihilism, the worst kind of nihilism. And Christianity offers such a spectacular alternative to that, an existence of meaning, of devotion, of joy, of a sense of liberation. We become liberated by doing what we're supposed to do. We don't having obligations doesn't deprive us of our liberty. It enables it. So the idea of obedience has become tarnished, and there's no Christianity cannot survive in a world that regards obedience as beneath us. And of course, when people think of obedience as being free of all obligations, sooner or later, the people who were so proud of being, not bowing down to any other thing, any other moral thing or spiritual thing or what, sooner or later they prostrate themselves before some mad ideology that lays waste the world. So there's what I tried to show is the difference between the idea of the self that has become current, and it's epitomized by Justice Kennedy's decision in the Casey decision, and what the existence that Paul described. I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me. I'm not an independent actor. I have been set free from myself. I have become useful to another. And in being obedient to that other, I can become useful to all kinds of others in my environment, in my life. I can become useful to my wife, my children, my neighbors. That's made possible by the fact that I've learned to give myself to Christ and to his church, and to learn from my elders in the faith, increasingly learn, go back, learn from the past, realize that it's not a question of the idea of progressivism is so nonsensical, because the things that can progress, I mean, I don't deny that there has been quote unquote progress in many areas. Nobody wants to live without modern dentistry, for example, or I wear eyeglasses. I'm glad that I can see better. So there are technologically and scientifically real progress has been made. But the idea that there's a comparable progress in human affairs or in moral affairs is a mistake.
Christianity first goes about kind of conquering mythology and its sacrificial violence, right? So you could see that maybe the concept of the self is the last mythology for Christianity to conquer in history, right? And in some sense, it's the biggest myth that's still remaining to be kind of destroyed by Christianity's kind of subversion of the worlds and its powers. And it's the toughest one because it seems on the surface to liberate one from the ancient myths, right? If you have an individual self, you can choose to reject the dark ages of mythology, but actually that's kind of its trick, right? Is that it enslaves you to various forms of totalitarian ideology. But would you say, I'm trying to take an optimistic approach here, that the individual is a transitionary species towards the interdividual person, that you're describing? Like it's almost like you couldn't, how Rene Girard talked about some of the more inaccurate forms of atonement theory became popular, almost like because humans needed to keep some of the sacred of the classical pagan sacred concepts intertwined into the true God to make it attractive to worship. And it's almost as if God uses our errors as a kind of grace to transition us into different periods, because we couldn't handle the disruptive change from totally rejecting, as you've written about a lot and spoken about a lot. You can't just pull the carpet underneath mankind and their sense of the sacred overnight. And that's why we have the Old Testament and all this long period of kind of incubation or whatever in redemptive history. So with that in mind, because one way of looking at what you're saying there, sir, is that it sounds like you're kind of making just a general conservative critique. The 1950s things were okay, and now everything's gone into nihilistic chaos. But what you're actually making, I think, from what I've seen from this book, and I haven't finished it yet, but you're actually kind of making a more progressive critique. You're saying, humanity needs to wake up from this outdated notion of the myth of the individual and transition to the person. And that would help alleviate a lot of our problems, right? You're not just talking about the moral failing of failing to be a person, but rather you're almost suggesting there's an intellectual breakthrough, right?
On me, David, but yeah, in 1950 things weren't okay.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, the problem we're facing started centuries ago.
Sure.
And it's really endemic to the human. We're fallen creatures. This is a version of of that recognition. We are predisposed to self-assertion and self-gratification and so on. Just to reiterate, we have been making an anthropological mistake for a long time. You could say in some ways humanity has always made that mistake, but it's different when a Christian civilization makes it. Christianity or Christ or the church, however you want to say it, has so ennobled the human situation that it's like we've learned to ride a bicycle and at a sort of 10-year-old level, and we think we can get on a Harley and go 100 miles an hour. It doesn't work that way. So we've been ennobled by Christianity, and at some point we think, well, this nobility we have is intrinsic to me. I didn't get it from anywhere, and therefore I can now operate on that independence and autonomy. And it's not true. So a Christian civilization, if it loses its faith, becomes dangerously nihilistic, more so than other people whose cultural heritage has not lifted them to the heights that Christianity lifts its believers. And even though they're deep, profound believers, and then sort of superficial Easter and Christmas people, but nevertheless, it has lifted the whole culture and has done that for centuries. And what it makes us think that we have powers, individual powers that we do not have. We have our finger on the button. We have huge powers, of course, but we can't. If the Western civilization loses Christianity, it will be far more dangerous than some civilization that's never been Christianized.
Right.
Because with the desperation, all the old gods will have been slain, and so the attempt to go back to them will approximate the attempt by Nietzsche and Hitler and so on, or the Russian Revolution, all that sort of mad unleashing of violence and fury and callousness and heartlessness. We lay ourselves open for that, and I fear in our world today, we don't realize what a magnificent mess we will make if we lose our Christian heritage, and if we individually lose the call we have from Christ to live a full and noble and selfless, as far as we can, and devoted life. That's it. It's a huge. It's the greatest gift in the world, and we have been given that gift, soiled by the hands of those who passed it on to us, no doubt. Nonetheless, it's the greatest gift in the world. And it's not easy today to pass it on, because a lot of people have come to think, they say, look, things are going pretty well. I'm doing pretty well. They don't realize the culture from which they're benefiting was its most beneficial features came from Christianity. And if they kill the goose that laid the golden egg, they will be in a spiritual desert. And I don't think that's going to happen. I have faith. I believe that I don't know what's going to. I do think, and this again I learned from Renee, we shouldn't stop reading the Book of Revelation. We can end in an apocalypse, and we're closer to it now than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that's not coincidental to all the things we've been talking about here.
Yeah, when you saw the spokesperson for the Ukrainian military, and it's an American guy dressed as a woman, it looks like one of those beasts from Revelation of undifferentiation, announcing nuclear war.
It's truly unbelievable. It's truly unbelievable, and that's why it's not enough to. I mean, we do politically. We need to salvage our republic, no doubt. But that in itself is not enough. We need a conversion of heart, and we need to realize what. I mean, Christianity. You can sing its praises and whatever, but all we can do individually, well, I shouldn't say that. Each of us has a role to play. I wrote a book, so it's one of the things I can do. But we have to be, and to use von Balthasar, who's another of my key people, Swiss theologian, very profound. He said he talked about the theodrama. And we're all players in a theodrama. And it's a drama having to do with what is true and what is real. And each of us is an actor in that drama. And von Balthasar says that the choice is between a yes and a no to Christ. He says that all human history after the Christian revelation, and this is a very interesting formulation, it's the mutual intensification of the yes and the no to Christ. History after the Christian revelation consists of the mutual intensification of the yes and the no to Christ. So, is the yes keeping pace with the no? Now, in the book, I quote an example of that is Bob Dylan in his 1979 album, "You Got to Serve Somebody."
Yeah.
It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. And that's just, in a way, that's an echo of von Balthasar. And both of them named only two choices: the Christ or the devil, or the yes and the no to Christ. So one way I think of this is a kind of fiendishly Roman Catholic way of thinking about it. But Chesterton once said, I'll paraphrase him to shorten it. This is a paraphrase of Chesterton. If we all, it's like Dylan said, it's a choice between the devil and the Lord, or von Balthasar between the intensification of the yes and the no. So to add Chesterton to the mix and to paraphrase him, if we all lived to be 1,000 years old, this is Chesterton, if we all lived to be 1,000 years old, we would all die Catholic. Now that's typically pugnacious thing of Chesterton, but what he meant by that, and I paraphrase it, but what he meant by that is that if we had 1,000 years of experience, each of us, we would recognize, based on all that experience, we only have, far fewer years, so we have this little piece of the picture, and it's all filled with drama and all the things that titillate us. But if we had 1,000 years to look back on, we would realize that the whole thing was a drama of the yes and the no to Christ. And that's the world we live in. And I think it's incumbent upon us to realize that we're in a very profound crisis right now, politically, theologically, eschatologically, and it's a moment where we're being called to perform each individual, to go back to personare, the word person. I don't think I said it. The word person comes from this term, which goes back to Etruscan theater, and it refers to the mask. Everybody knows that. But the purpose of the mask was not to depict the character, because in the amphitheaters where these dramas were played, it was far more important to hear what the actors said than to see the details of his face. So the masks were created in order to amplify the voice of the actor. So the purpose of and this is the root of personare, the person. The person is someone who allows the voice of another to come through him or her. And not just in the literal sense of the voice, but that is a conduit for the other. The other is always the Lord God, the incarnation of whom is Christ. So when Paul says, I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me, he's approximating that same image. And the idea, von Balthasar's idea, that it is a drama, that it's what he called a theodrama. We each perform. Now, today we talk pejoratively about performative stuff, which something is done just to show off or to, to show our virtue or whatever. But there's a legitimate understanding of the performative nature of our deepest beliefs and experiences, because they were given to us not to hoard, but to share. So we each have, and you're doing a magnificent job of it with your podcast. We each have a responsibility to become ambassadors for that which has touched our lives and saved us from silliness and nonsense and sin. So I very much like that dramatic understanding of Christian faith. And we perform it not in order for others to admire us. That's such a subtle thing. It's, that creeps in even when you think you have avoided it. But we do it because of the joy that comes from being part of the revelation of Christ to the world. In some little way, it's always, involved with all the funny business we humans drag into our situation. But still, the nobility comes from trying to live in such a way that if someone happens to catch a glimpse of us out of the corner of their eye, they might see something that touches a chord. They might see someone who is loving or merciful or kind or generous or whatever it is, and not attribute it to the person. But the person is the personare. Another is coming through that person. So if somebody looks and says, oh, that's a really, honorable, upright, decent, kind person, using the term in a generic sense, and they don't realize where that kindness and generosity came from, they've missed the story. So it's kind of hard to know, but some people walk around with a cross on their, around their neck. But I have nothing against that. But we should try to find some way, if in our better moments, if we exhibit some of the Christian virtues, we should try to do so in such a way that nobody gets the idea that it came from ourselves. they understand that we got it from someone else, and that someone else will have gotten to us through all kinds of intermediaries, all the saints, all the church traditions, the sacraments, the bells and smells. All of it is part of what infects us with this contagion, which is the participation in this life, in the glory and grandeur of God, for all our sinfulness and selfishness and so on. So I didn't mean to give a homily, but I used to quote Rumi a lot, the Persian poet. Rumi said, "Be like one who, when he walks into the room, luck shifts to the one who needs it. Be like one who, when he walks into the room, luck shifts to the one who needs it." I think that's a tremendously Christian understanding of the world. And when St. Peter said, "Be prepared to give people a reason for your hope," that's a kind of Rumi-esque injunction. If to the extent that people become, a lot of hopelessness today passes itself off as a progressiveness, or we think we're going to bring the peace and justice of the world tomorrow by doing this and that and the other, but beneath it is a despair. We Christians have hope, and it's a hope that cannot be extinguished if it's drawing on the real source. And so more and more people they're going to lose hope, because the stuff we've been putting our hope in is not going to work. So we Christians have an opportunity to serve Christ by manifesting in a world growing hopeless, not just that we have hope, but that it didn't come from ourselves, that we have it because we have received it from the great religious tradition, the Jews and the Christians before us. So the book, as you probably know, is much more, it's a kind of a journey. The first half is a journey through these texts, literary ones and others, to show how we got here, to show basically how Justice Kennedy's version of reality has become predominant. And the second half of the book is a story of the Christian alternative to it.
Oh, it's very good, and I like this this quote from the Swiss cultural theorist. Is it Denis de Rougemont? Is that right?
De Rougemont, yeah.
Yeah. And he says, "The individual appears to me as the being that tears itself away from the dark sacredness, from the terror of the tribe." And it says, "But if one remains at this preliminary stage, then one receives nothing more than anarchy, the social vacuum." So again, it seems as if the individual is kind of like a transitionary stage, is what I'm getting at. I kind of get that take from you, that the individual is something that was kind of like, as we came out of our tribal mythic past, we would cling to the concept of an individual before we get to the higher knowledge of a person. Does that make sense?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I don't think of.
What do you think? Like John Locke's political philosophy is better than Hammurabi's code? That's what I'm getting kind of,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think modernity in the West has taken the uh, the relative autonomy that we each experience, because we're not like ancient tribes where there is no, you're a tribal person. Again, the word person doesn't exactly fit here, but you're part of a tribe and nothing else. And then Christianity frees you and makes you realize that you yourself have been called and sent. You yourself have been called and sent. And when you have that experience of being called and sent, the question is, by whom am I called and to whom am I sent? If we all woke up every day and ask ourselves, by whom have I been called and to whom have I been sent? This is a Christian experience, and in many ways a Judeo-Christian experience. We're called and sent. And the idea that sort of came in with modernity is that we have this autonomy, and we can do all kinds of things. We can accomplish great things, using it. But and maybe we think we're being called to build up a civilization or to whatever it is. But I think the Christian understanding is you personally have been called and sent, and you should look around and look, inside to do, scrutinize yourself. By whom am I called, and to whom am I sent? And if we believers do that, I think we can set an example. It's always dangerous to talk about setting an example, because you have the danger of becoming self-consciously public.
Yeah.
Oh, other people looking at me, I better behave myself. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. We could use a little more of that. If people, I mean,
Yeah.
if the Senate had a dress code,
Yeah.
they used to, it would be better, because it would be in, having to do with the dignity of their office. So, we should be aware that, others are watching and so on. But the joy of it comes not from the fact that we have onlookers, but the fact that we are trying against the grain of our own selfishness to live in such a way that a serious onlooker would wonder where it came from, and might even catch a glimpse of where it came from by observing us for a little while. And if they tapped us on the shoulder and asked us where it came from, we would be, like St. Peter said, we would be prepared to give them the reasons for our hope. So we're each an actor in the theodrama. And I have much more faith in that than in a grand, evangelical scheme for re-evangelizing the world. I'm all for re-evangelizing the world, but I think it becomes a strategy and a cause to so on, and it's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to negate the value of that, but you don't have to be part of some impressive campaign to restore Christianity. You can do your part every day in the course of your daily life. Just by living as a person who is joyful and hopeful and loving and kind and ready to endure suffering if called upon to do so. That's the difference between resolve and will. Will wants to get your own way, but resolve is the acceptance of the suffering that will be required of you if you're faithful to the call of Christ. I mean, the cross is the beauty. One of the great things about Christianity. There are two great things about Christianity. There's thousands, but two great words in the Christian vocabulary, and without them we would be lost. The first one is grace. What is grace? It's a great mystery, grace. So we have that word, and we should plumb its depth a little more. And the other word that's so helpful is the word cross. When if you my wife and I pray for other people, and some of them are having difficulties. And it's better to think of these difficulties as crosses than as, this or that disease or this or that tragedy in their life or hardship. And if we can recognize those things that are, burdensome, if we can recognize that they're crosses and hear Jesus say, take up your cross and follow me, it doesn't make the cross less heavy, but it gives it a dignity that makes it endurable with dignity. And those are, again, that's what comes with Christian faith. We have these ways of seeing the human predicament that are such treasures. So we need to be the kind of people that we need to be seeds in this culture, increasingly a culture of frantic thrashing around and despair and superficiality.
Do you have you seen the BBC documentary by Adam Curtis called "The Century of the Self"?
No.
I think you would like it. It's it kind of examines particularly the post-World War II environment in which the United States government, particularly intelligence and army institutions, were interested in understanding how to kind of remake the human mind into a new man. And they used this rise. Harry Truman created this therapeutic state in which they basically went out to evangelize to working class America and small town America the new religion of psychology and counseling to replace the priest and the church.
Sure.
And they were successful in that, and they basically there was a popular survey that was very important for developing the psychological departments at the time, called the authoritarian mind survey or something like that. And it was about grading your rank from authoritarian fascist to democratic mindset. And it was based on, did you have liberated views of gender differences? And did you have, these different things? And it was taken actually from the same psychological re-education programs that Germany was being subjected to by the Allies at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the German model on the scale where they would test these working class families and people from middle class communities, Christian, and they would rank them on a scale of fascist to, but in the German scale, it was fascist to revolutionary mind. But they knew that wouldn't play, that Marxist language wouldn't play as well in America. So they went from fascist to democratic mindset. And the democratic mindset was the same Marxist values. And what it was all about doing was trying to basically dethrone the father from the family by design to create a new totalitarian regime that would be called anti-fascist, which is kind of interesting. We see Antifa, popular today. But any thoughts on that? Because I do think that the world of the therapeutic state and the terminologies and the mindsets that we get from that has very much nurtured this sick sense of self that is destroying our culture right now.
I agree completely. So it's a massive problem because the instruments that are arrayed to bring that about are huge and hugely significant. We've seen the social media thing. I mean, if you have something like TikTok on every cell phone of anybody from 12 years old, between 12 and 18, the soul crushing consequences of that. Now, I don't know anything about TikTok, except occasionally I see something about it. Maybe there's some good things.
Yeah, maybe we'll try to put this interview on TikTok.
Oh, well, listen, let's do it. I'm all for going where the problem is, but these social media sites and so on, for all of their value at one level, especially for the young, the really young, they become an alternative reality, and they take these children, they draw these children out of their of that nurturing family situation and isolate them. And once isolated, they then create this faux community that's on the cell phone. And these are forces that are so destructive. Not that there can't be something valuable done here and there. I mean, this person who does libs of TikTok or something, she apparently does some really important stuff, and other things, I'm sure. But for the vast majority of young people who are in very formative years, they need to be seeing and hearing from people who draw on a joy that the world cannot extinguish, and it does not depend on getting your own way. And that's what we Christians are here to do, is to leave evidence for the truth that we have, unworthy though we are, that we have received from our predecessors in the faith and from Christ himself. So that's the dramatic dignity of Christian existence in our time. And I go back, we had this conversation about Renee in our last podcast of it, when Renee told that room full of biblical scholars in my old office, when somebody asked, what should we do about this problem? And Renee said, well, I don't know, but maybe we should begin with personal sanctity. And I knew instantly my teacher had just stepped into my life. So if we trust in the power of a Christian existence to transform the world little by little by little, we will be happier and less frenetic and less panicked by circumstances which are quite dire and might easily panic us.
I think about what you said with the role of Christians to bear witness to hope and joy, and truly, mediator. That's where we get this concept of media, right? And
right, sure.
The church can keep complaining about how bad and sorry the news media is, or they can be the good news media themselves and actually do their job. I mean, having good media report on the truth of the world and, the slain victims of the world, the lambs of God that are yet to be understood by humanity. I mean, there's a lot of news to report if we would see that being media is an essential part of being a Christian. And it doesn't mean you have to have a formal podcast or whatever, but I think it'd be nice if millions of Christians did, so to speak.
Well, absolutely. I agree completely with that. But at the same time, not as an alternative, but at the same time, each one of us is a medium. That what we want the electronic media to do, each of us can do in our daily lives, and that may seem like a drop in the bucket, but you never know. You never know. I remember who was it who said, all I want to do is for my life to become the ashes out of which a true saint will grow. You never know how your influence might lead to someone becoming, well, first of all, just a faithful person or a kinder person. But we all have the role individually to be the medium through which people can have access to Christ. They can, marvel at our hope and our equanimity in the face of all these dangers.
It reminds me of a fellow Catholic of yours, Marshall McLuhan. Medium is the message,
Yeah, absolutely. No, he was brilliant. I
wish that Rene Girard and him had been able to interact, because I think they would have created some explosive ideas and insights.
I have no idea. I mean, I have no doubt that is true. I mean, one always thinks of people that Rene could have interacted with profitably, but McLuhan was certainly one of those.
He was a big student of the medieval ages and everything. I think Rene and him would have had a lot of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like especially, what Girard was talking about with texts being, transitionary fossils away from the sacred towards, the modern skeptical approach to texts, having suspicion. Mm-hmm. And then I think what McLuhan talked about, the different media extensions being extensions of man. And he said all throughout his work, I'm merely observing this because, and he kept anchoring it into his Christian faith is what allowed him to see these effects of what media technologies were doing to the human mind, not the content. That was such a hard thing for McLuhan to get across. I'm not talking about the content per se. That's the easy, low-hanging fruit. I'm talking about what does it actually do to change the human mind when you have these different technologies. You know, if you can get on a high speed jet and go around the world, what does that do to the human species?
That's
not,
right.
You know, so
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, well, we live in a world today where these technologies are now taking control in many ways of the younger generation, and the negative consequences of that long term are probably going to be staggering.
Yeah.
So we have to do what we can to show them that there's something more interesting than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, sir. Gil Bailie, it's
Oh,
always a
thank
delight
you,
to talk
David.
to you, and you've been very generous with your time. And I want folks to check out your book if they want to learn more about this subject and some of the ideas you're putting together today. It's called The Apocalypse of the Sovereign Self, Recovering the Christian Mystery of Personhood. And I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future.
Thank you so much, David. God bless.
God bless.